My name is Jason Greer, a motivational speaker who specializes in equality and diversity training, soft skills training, and motivational speeches. We experience the dopamine effect when we talk to someone who looks like us, talks like us, acts like us, and ultimately thinks like us. We biologically feel good in their presence, and we want to continue associating with others that trigger these good feelings. But the reverse is also true. When we encounter someone who doesn't look like us, talk like us, or act like us, and get ready for this, thinks like us, then our bodies produce a cortisol effect, which is called the stress hormone. It's difficult to convince people from different backgrounds to embrace one another. Every time they get together, their respective bodies are screaming, "Run!" The only way to break down these barriers is to focus attention on building relationships in such a way that the mind and the body says, it's okay to relax in the presence of this person. They won't bite you. My approach to diversity in the workplace is centered on building commonalities and shared experiences so that the team concept overrides the preconceived notions we sometimes have about other people. The goal of the training is simple: to bring people together and to maximize your productivity.
Hello. I can't help but notice that everyone seems really lonely. What's going on? We all seem to know we're in this hellscape where monetization reigns supreme as job security and stable resources seem more and more fleeting. We all know social media is not helping, but we keep using it for some reason, trying to learn about exercise strategies, book reading strategies, study strategies, skincare routines, hair care routines, fashion trends, sustainable small businesses, plant raising tips, recipes, book talk, and vibes. But it all seems kinda hollow, doesn't it? The craving of detachment increases more and more despite all the self-improvement projects. In response, a lot of people start to radicalize. Some of you start to read or pretend to read leftist theory, and you begin to imagine this ideological endgame, this place where everything is better, this utopia. And in that utopia, you can't help but notice that there is a common theme, and that theme is community.
I think the most effective way to combat an individuality complex is to realize that capitalism benefits from you being hyper concerned about your individuality. Capitalism thrives off of the myth of individual exceptionalism. You're not like everybody else. You're gonna make it. You're gonna be super successful. You're gonna be one of the 1%, right? Like, this is the myth that is fed to us, so we keep working really, really hard. And then we can look at those 1% of people who have made it and be like, see, the system works because we got a Beyonce. Or the system works because we got a Jeff Bezos. When in reality, most of us know, like, no, the system does not work. And those individual exceptions to the rule mean absolutely nothing for how the rest of us are living. So if you approach it from that perspective and you understand that, like, your individuality complex has been, like, carefully crafted and, like, upheld by capitalism, it becomes easier to deconstruct that idea and instead start to identify with the rest, with the 99% of people who aren't the exception to the rule. And there's something fucking beautiful in that, to stand with other people because there's strength in numbers. And at the root of that is human empathy, to care about other people. Being like other people can be an amazing thing.
Today, let's talk about Community for a bit. What is it? It's a show that ran on NBC, and it starred the guy from, what was his name? Joel McHale? Okay. Why do we care about it so much? How can we get a sense of the humane, genuine social interaction that so many of us want, yet feel so isolated trying to find? Is community really the answer that we're seeking? Let's find out after the ad break. So it is in fact true that we as humans are not supposed to be at home staring at screens all day. A lack of social interaction and human connection, which we often call loneliness, is constantly linked towards negative mental health outcomes. Often these situations arise out of a feeling that we are not connected enough to social groups. As such, a lot of attention has been brought to how much people's brains were altered and their social interactions hampered by the COVID-19 pandemic. Explanations for this often start at the anthropological level, noting how early humans survived through community and pooling resources. The tendency as creatures to have social behaviors and regulations and communities is not fully unique to humans. A seminal paper by biologist Richard D. Alexander outlines a lot of our understanding of how social groups form and evolve over time. Our basic statement must be that, in general, groups form and persist because all of the individuals involved somehow gain genetically. The group brings to each individual within it some set of collective benefits, especially those which are created and distributed by the group members' efforts, and this can be seen throughout evolution. But there's a delineation that Alexander makes that seems to kind of contradict a lot of the sentiment we hear about community. Ironically, the argument that man is basically cooperative and altruistic is no less instinctivist than its counterpart that he is basically aggressive and competitive. What Alexander notes here is that while animals, including humans, often get together and work together to achieve goals for the benefit of everybody in the group, this is not necessarily a part of its nature, a part of the nature of humans even. At least not any more than the opposite tendency to be individualistic. Further elaboration on this critiques the model that humans have adapted and survived over time by cooperating to centralize new advances, such as technological advances, food gathering techniques, etc. Alexander posits that one of the key aspects for which animals prize the community is for their own self-development within them, i.e., power struggles over reproduction and leadership, etc. Many investigators of human history have assumed that man evolved his great intelligence and his sociality because of its advantages in obtaining food, especially in connection with hunting large game. This view virtually requires a dependence upon large game and implies that the genetic changes leading to modern man spread through some unspecified kind of peaceful replacement of starved out, less intelligent groups by better fed, more intelligent groups. Necessarily, such a view reduces the significance of culture as a group phenomenon with a feedback effect upon genetic change. Either intergroup competition was important, or culture as a group phenomenon was not. What Alexander's getting at is that beef is a part of our human history. Individuals striking out on their own, competing with one another, fighting one another, is as much a part of our human history as being collective. And that process by which humans evolved and developed and whatnot is a complicated one that can't simply be answered by talking about the smart ways humans kindly work together. Just as it's naive to reduce the entirety of human history down to a bunch of people were stronger and more competitive than everyone else and they survived and that's why we are how we are, I also think it's also reductivist, maybe even eugenicist, to suggest that, oh, it was the intelligence and only the smartest, kindest humans that were civil worked together and that those are the humans that survived. You know what I'm saying? You see what I'm getting at? But that's kind of a thing we are used to saying. Humans are social animals. We're supposed to be together without questioning why and all the natural processes that are part of that. Anyway, that's enough anthropological discourse, thank God. What we're trying to talk about is right now, what's going on right now, and whether or not community is the answer. Of course, community itself is a really complex area of study. It can be defined fairly simply as, groups of people coming together for some sort of reason, but it's way more complicated than that. Like, just take a look at the Wikipedia page for the thing. Of note, especially when studying human interaction and community, is this dynamic of individualism versus collectivism. You hear this a lot. Usually this is the dynamic that we get to explain the differences between cultures within different countries. The US and other Western capitalist democracy states are very individualistic, and Eastern states with their Eastern philosophies like China and Japan are more collectivistic, and maybe we should each learn from each other. Suffice it to say, this is also kind of reductive too. Individualism and collectivism can perhaps be observed in patterns of certain cultures, but are extremely difficult to identify across broad strokes. With that said, what are the patterns and the things we're choosing to observe to make these observations? The US, largely considered a deeply individualistic country, is one that still emphasizes collective cultural mores, like respecting the troops and the observance of the Pledge of Allegiance. China, largely considered a deeply collectivist country, appears to be much more readily accepting of things like job hopping, given that the average young adult employee stays for less than 2 years at a job in China, while in the US, this demographic stays for almost 3 years. And that's not to say that we can't at all ever make generalizations ever. Sometimes these generalizations are useful. But we have to be careful when we make those observations and think about the context. What kind of communities are being discussed? And do these communities operate individually or collectively? And why is it so hard to say communities? Communities! Maybe most importantly, what makes a community in the first place? Let's talk about it after the break. Thanks for watching the ads. They help the channel. So let's say you're lonely. Let's just say that. Let's just assume. And you feel a strong pull towards collectivism instead of individualism, and you feel this need to find community. What communities do you choose from? You're ultimately surrounded by and even involved in a ton of communities formed all over, all around you. And the thing is, you probably aren't engaging with them much. There are tons of theories of community types. They essentially boil down to the amounts of people in those communities, their reason for belonging to them, and their interactions within them. A community of place describes a community defined by people co-inhabiting an area. That could be as specific and intimate as the regulars at a coffee shop, or as general as the residents of a town. A community of interest, as implied, describes a community tied together by sharing an interest. A community of practice, similarly, describes people who are tied together by practicing something, often in learning and cooperation with each other. We also often speak of communities bound by identity, like the Chinese American community or the LGBTQ+ community, who share commonality in experiencing life within that identity. And what you may be thinking, dear viewer, when you're reminded of all these communities that already exist, is that actually a lot of those communities are not very fun.
Excuse me, we could use the money to hire firemen to finally put out that blaze on the east side of town.
Boring. You don't want to engage in them very much. You may belong, like me, to the Latin American community in the US and feel like, don't really have great experiences with my local Latin American communities. Not really my type of people. Not my vibe. I don't know why you would feel that because, we're pretty cool, but...
Mi gente latino.
And the same could be said about your suburban community, your local basketball playing community, the local people at your coffee shop. I mean, everybody who shows up there is just staring at MacBook Pros all day, wearing nice clothes, bringing their dogs everywhere. I mean, God, I love dogs, but do you have to bring your dog everywhere? Often, the feeling we get is that the communities that we're in or around are isolating in and of themselves. It feels like even though you're supposed to be part of these things, nobody's really caring about you. Nobody's really reaching their hand out to you, listening to your problems, trying to help you, trying to care about you. Or even worse, they're conflicting with you or making your life harder. And that's where we pull back, right? We go to our rooms, we turn on our computers, and we look for things online that can help us feel and express and learn about the things that we're going through that we can't feel and express with the people out there. Sometimes we search for online community, which is a great idea until you realize you've been in your 6th discourse of the week discussing whether or not the writers of this TV series you stan are actually problematic or not. The truth is that our mental health troubles and social discomforts do not come from a neat dichotomy of community being good and individualism being bad. Studies that examine correlations between collectivism and mental health outcomes come away with complex results. One pattern we can note from research is that it depends on what the collective is like. For example, Papadopoulos et al. Find in a small UK-based survey that a person's positive mental health outcomes are related to collectivism or individualism depending on whether or not the collectivism is coming from a positive place, whether or not the collective has good mental health attitudes or not. This often explains why students, for instance, have such negative mental health outcomes in places like South Korea that emphasize conformity among young people towards a set of rigid social mores and educational career choices. And in general, education systems all over the world, not just Asia, have a big problem of enforcing conformity and unflattering comparison among young people, which is something we talked about in our video about that. This reveals to us, in fact, that the collective and the individual have their own roles. Just like we might turn to the collective to deal with stuff we want on our own, sometimes we turn to our own to deal with stuff that is bothering us about the collective. And it seems more and more like these days people are leaning towards the latter, right? People are pulling in more, people are individuating more. And with that comes a lot of problems, especially when you know that a lot of people stand to gain from breaking down collective action that could go against their interests. More on this after the break.
To bring people together and to maximize your productivity.
So through our studies, we realized that yes, collective action is a part of human history, and generally speaking, collective action is incredibly good at getting stuff done, especially in relation to people doing things in more divided senses on their own. United we stand, divided we fall, etc., etc. This, of course, can mean that there's something scary about the collective, off-putting even, depending on what those goals are. Maybe there's no greater example of this than the history of labor struggle. An article from The Intercept observes today's union-busting efforts and the ways that they use friendly labeling and terminology around ideas of diversity and inclusion to effectively practice what they term as union avoidance. A labor union, of course, is a general organization made from the collective efforts of workers to protect workers within a workplace from exploitation, namely to negotiate fairer wages and benefits as well as protect against discrimination and retaliation. Business experts throughout the world congregate in public and private settings to discuss strategies to avoid having to deal with these efforts. The best way to do so is to chip away at the strength of a collective by any means possible, which often means engaging with individual interests of individual members of the workforce. Much of the conversation centered on claims that a union would hamper the company's ability to listen and communicate directly with our employees, and reduce the company's ability to be flexible in resolving workplace concerns. Such arguments are routine in most organizations facing a union vote. Now, I want you to note the language here. Note how they're shaping this language, and oftentimes it's based on also trying to address this sense of isolation that the worker might feel, and saying basically that the company can provide an answer to that rather than, a union. It's intimate to talk about race and identity, said Duff. That creates a vulnerability. And to have consultants come in and say, hey, look, I understand the discrimination you've gone through. You can open up to me. That can get you a lot of valuable intelligence. Such vulnerabilities can be key insights during an organizing drive. In 2011, Pratt Logistics opened a new plant in Pennsylvania. The company brought in a man who only identified himself as an efficiency expert named Jay. Jay went around conducting one-on-one interviews with workers, asking them about what problems they faced, their values, and concerns. Later, when truckers and warehouse workers at Pratt began steps to form a union at the new plant, the company instantly fired union sympathizers. It wasn't until later that they found out Jay's real identity. Jason Greer, the union suppression consultant, who had been hired explicitly to identify potential union supporters. When the Teamsters Union later brought the case to court, arguing illegal retaliation and unfair labor practices, labor attorneys noted that Greer on his website explicitly advertised himself as a union buster who wakes up every day with one goal in mind, and that's to keep unions from taking over and ruining businesses that my friends and my clients have worked their entire lives to build. Those words are gone from Greer's website. Now he lists himself as a diversity consultant.
My name is Jason Greer, a motivational speaker who specializes in equality and diversity training, soft skills training, and motivational speeches.
Related to that, it's no wonder that in workplaces like these and in a world so hyper-capitalist like ours, that people take to social media where other people are and express how atomized and lonely they feel. Consider what self-help messaging often does, for instance. It trains you to focus on yourself in order to solve your individual problems so that you can fit better with society. Stop looking outward and focus inward is the slogan. Stop blaming your problems on society and your family and your friends. It's all up to you to make your life better, to do the right thing.
This is the secret to my happiness. I'm so fucking happy because I can't hear a fucking thing.
It just so happens that corporate entities have the means to provide you every tool you need to individuate. Corporations will sell you your computer and phone through which you can buy and download apps that help you organize your schedule, your mental health, your library content, your notes, your contacts, your conversations, and of course, your social media apps. It's not called a digital footprint after all. It's a footprint, like a single foot. Every social media app now prides itself on being able to provide the most customizable experience to the particular user. Since Google took the lead in profiting off of gathering everyone's individual data and tailoring itself algorithmically to each person according to it, every other app-based company has followed suit. The Twitter timeline is based on your input. Your Instagram timeline is based on what you want to see. And God knows TikTok is built entirely on tailoring itself to the user's every input. It's called a For You page, for God's sake.
그러니까 이제 자유의 공간이라고 하는 그런 구글이나 소셜 네트워크가 파놉티콘적인 형태로 바꿔집니다. 그러니까 이제 그게 자발적으로, 그러니까 사람들은 자기를 노출하고 스스로 전시함으로써 열렬히 디지털 판옵티쿰 건설에 동참하는 거예요.
But the great irony of all of this is that we're using these apps to connect with other people. Just like the union busters, social media companies benefit both from our need to be seen as unique individuals and our need to collectivize. And that makes these things very easy for corporations to co-opt. And all of a sudden, your revolutionary radicals of the modern times are doing what? Talks at Google and shaking hands with politicians. Kind of weird. My point is that we have to stop fetishizing communities. Communities can never represent a beautiful, perfect answer to our individual struggles. And that's part of why they're necessary in the first place. That's part of why they are what they are. Collectives are formed by necessity to address individuals who collectively share particular issues, particular desires, and thus recognize the need to team up in order to get those things done. They can come about instantaneously, they could come about slowly, but ultimately they are based in each member of the collective individually deciding to make sacrifices and to put up with certain things because overall the task of the group is important. By fetishizing the community, by saying it is this answer to our problems, by saying it is this utopic almost concept that will be the way that we get out of our loneliness, we create a false idea in our head of what it actually takes to collectivize. If you think the community is this amazing natural thing that humans are supposed to do naturally and will overcome anything through and will be very good to address all the loneliness and sadness you might feel, what's going to happen when it doesn't? When you're actually in a community and you feel bad things and you go through problems because of that community, it's going to be hard to reconcile that because how could this be community if it makes me suffer? The curtains are opened or whatever. The thing is revealed. A lot of the times we just search for another answer to continue this attachment. The problem must be myself. It must be other people. This represents us individualizing the community. The community has to be authentic and good to me in all the ways I want it to be. It can't be too simple, too rigid, or too problematic so as to trouble my authentic experience. Unfortunately, communities don't and can't work this way. Meanwhile, we may react to these issues by taking time alone, looking inward and trying to better ourselves, which can be good. We may change our bodies, our faces, our style of dress, our style of talking, our affiliations, our whole thing, in order to reach this ideal version of ourselves, which ultimately is a concept that other people have imparted onto us, an ideal that has been absorbed from others into our thing. This represents us communitizing the individual. I have to be the best person. I can't be complicated and messy and flawed so as to be rejected by others if they are to find out the things I keep private. Unfortunately, individuals do not work this way. In reality, it is just as natural to separate from communities and individualize as it is to work with others. Both are common parts of the human experience that have to work harmoniously, in part by acknowledging the complications, the pros and cons of each, and using them to balance one another rather than seeking the answers and the perfection to one side within the other. This is not a critique of the TikTokers that are merely expressing their loneliness and desire for community. It's also not a critique of the valid observation that capitalism seizes on individualism, but it's an additional observation that capitalism also seizes on collectivism. Someone will always try to profit from your desire to be a unique individual, and someone will likewise always try to profit from your desire to be a part of something bigger, and usually that someone is the same person. This video is more a critique of the neoliberalization of community, the idea that it is an idealistic reward, something good people can chase and acquire for themselves through right mind and effort, rather than a necessity of life that can be annoying or cool or both at the same time depending on what day it is. This neoliberal idea of community individualizes it, makes us conceive it as a good part of a good person's life, which can unequivocally be achieved happily in the systems that already exist because the resources are all there and all we need to do is be good people and it'll be good. This is not what community is. Community is hard. It sucks. Sometimes it's soul crushing. If you want to be more social, that means you have to socialize with other people. And other people are weird and they suck sometimes. Likewise, if you want to do something collectively, that means you got to work with other people. And other people are hard to work with. Effective community is community that does the thing it aims to do well, whether that be a community of restaurants that donate their food together for the hungry people in their neighborhood, or a community of union busters that congregate to figure out how to stop other poorer people from making their own effective communities so that they can improve their conditions. The best way to make an effective community is for everyone in the community to agree on a set of goals and agree on what it'll take each person to achieve those goals. That process shouldn't be antagonistic, but it doesn't necessitate deep bonds of love or friendship or even trust that will oftentimes be the thing you're seeking when you're lonely. So, is community the answer to our loneliness? Not really. Loneliness can be understood as a discontent with your social functioning. It may be a good idea to join a community when you feel alone, but if the community you join sucks, that can do more harm than good. Some people relieve that sense of loneliness by getting a pet, or exercising more, or just in general becoming more and more comfortable with their own presence and self, whatever the self is. Most importantly, loneliness is just not on its own a good reason to join a community. If you're lonely and you want to bowl more, then yeah, join a bowling club. Doing so would be a way to address the concrete desires and interests you already have. But if the desire is just to not be lonely, to just be more involved and more connected with other people, it can be really easy for someone to come around and manipulate that desire to make you a part of something you don't want to be a part of. What I think we should do is not just all get into communities and expect that that will be a big deal. I mean, working together is good, but we have to establish good goals within the communities that we join or create and structure them so that we can achieve those goals effectively. Collective action is perhaps the best way to address basically all of our concrete problems, especially in terms of politics. So we should organize groups where everybody agrees to try to solve a concrete problem, and then we act towards that. That's politics. And to me, politics should be focused on being effective and good, not on being wholesome and healing. Maybe I'm just a cold person. In conclusion, if you're lonely, I have good news. There's potentially millions of ways for you to at least come close to solving that issue, to connect with other people. I also have bad news. Each of those ways comes with their own issues. You have to decide which issues you're willing to live with and which issues you're willing to die for. Okay, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, etc., etc. Goodbye. Oh, there's a Ko-Fi link if you want to send me $1. Bye.